One of the often overlooked circumstances or byproducts of a captured nation, in other words, a nation that is so plagued with corruption, bad politics, politicians who effectively only look out for themselves, is that you end up with a population that continuously look for a savior, a population that will not take matters into its own hands, but instead continuously rely on someone to step up, someone to take the mantle and run with it and free us from the corrupting forces that have effectively imprisoned us. South Africa is likely one of the most captured nations on earth. And I mean that very literally. There are other nations that are far more corrupt. There are other nations where the politicians are quite literally openly the mafia and they have no qualms or secrets about it. But in most of those nations have already entered what we would call third world state. These are nations that are most often run by dictators, where really the people have little to no say in what the government even does. South Africa is uniquely situated where we are sort of in between nations. We're not a first world nation, but we're also not entirely a third world nation. And while there's certainly elements of dictatorship within South Africa, we're not exactly a dictatorship. We do have a democracy, and the people do still, to some extent, exercise their right to vote. Now, regardless of your feelings of democracy, as you know, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan thereof. That doesn't mean that I'm against voting. I'm for voting. I'm just not for the system that we currently have, because I don't think it's conducive to successful governance. And I think it prioritizes short-term gains. And almost always when it comes to politics and economics, anything that helps or boosts you in the short term will destroy you in the long term. That's just facts, right? So I have my own feelings of that. But one of the problems we also have, and this is sort of indicative of almost all nations as time goes on, eventually a captured nation also becomes home to a captured press. Now, I don't think I need to speak for anyone here. I think you all agree. This is preaching to the choir. You're watching me because you no longer trust the media. You no longer trust when News24 puts out a story that they're actually being truthful. And I think most of us feel the same way, because you can spot some of the discrepancies in the arguments and the stories that they present to you. Now, over the weekend, or not over the weekend, over the week, there's been an explosive set of allegations made by General Mkhwanazi with the Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee, where General Mkhwanazi called for something very interesting to happen to journalists that he referred to as captured. It should be made very clear that he did not refer to the media as a whole being captured, but rather that throughout their investigations, there has been times where journalists will contact police officers with information that these journalists should not have access to. This has not been made public yet. In one such case, Mkhwanazi actually mentions how he was contacted by a journalist that works for City Press, I believe, with information on a docket that's been opened that very same day that has not yet been released to the public. And the question then becomes, how the hell do you know of that docket? And Mkhwanazi says that he has a list of a handful of reporters that throughout their sort of journalistic sort of careers, they have pieced together credible evidence that suggests that these journalists are captured either by the police, by politicians, by crime intelligence, or by some shady force that wants to push propaganda and sort of, I think, almost influence where investigations go. Now, I think I could believe that. The fact that you have journalist on your shirt does not mean that you're automatically a good person. Are there people who go into journalism genuinely wanting to expose or bring out the truth and expose injustice? Absolutely. The same way that there are plenty of police officers that genuinely go into policing because they want to help keep the world safe. But there are just as many police officers that become police officers purely so that they can exercise dictator or dictatorial power over people and are almost psychopathic in their apply of force, in the same way that you will have journalists who see that as a wonderful avenue in order to enrich themselves, for number one, but also then push crazy objectives and crazy sort of propaganda stories. Now, Mkhwanazi has actually called for these journalists to be investigated by crime intelligence and then for these journalists to be jailed, saying that it is unacceptable that we in South Africa have a media that can basically print anything and they're fully protected under the law because our constitution does allow for a free and fair press. Of course, as you can imagine, as soon as he did this, the editors of South Africa went mad. You had the Editors Forum of South Africa blasting Mkhwanazi, saying that how dare you suggest that we should be investigated. You had News24's own Adrian Basson coming out and saying this is a threat against democracy, which is always their word for, and you have to understand this very clearly. When leftists say threat against democracy, they're not talking about the voting system. They're talking about the institutions of democracy. And that's not really a voting system or a free system. It's the institutions that propagandize the people. That's what they mean when they say threat against democracy. Because in reality, for example, people will consistently claim in the United States, Donald Trump is a threat against democracy. Up until now, Donald Trump, in his first term and his second term, has not suspended elections. He has not removed people's ability to vote. He has tried to make voting more free and fair by removing elements or avenues of voting that could be used to impact the election unduly, like mail-in ballots, for example. These are all moves that, while you may agree or disagree with them, aren't moves of a man that's trying to capture the voting system or destroy democracy. But this is why you have to understand the use of their language. The attack or the threat on democracy only speaks about the institutions, and the media is a valuable asset for captured states. In the old regime, with the apartheid regime, they used the media incredibly effectively. When the media put out a story, it wouldn't always be that the media just doesn't cover things. They will cover things, but how is it being covered? What is being said and what isn't being said? So oftentimes the people of apartheid South Africa would get only the facts as the government wanted those facts to be expressed. One of the things we can sort of point out with News24 is that they have been painfully silent on Cyril Ramaphosa. They go after Paul Mashatile just fine. They go after most of the ANC just fine. But there are a number of ministers and our president specifically that are almost never written about. And even when they're writing about Cyril Ramaphosa, they're making sure to stress just how much these are just allegations. Nothing's been proven yet. And one has to wonder. I'm not suggesting that News24 is absolutely captured. I don't have the evidence for that. That's why we have YouTube members and Patreon, because I would like to get investigative journalists of my own to investigate people like News24. But it does seem like something is a little bit fishy. Now, Mkhwanazi is saying that they should be investigated and then they should be jailed. He made the same claims for MPs, that MPs should also spend time in jail when they break the law, specifically around police investigations. And I kind of agree with him, but I don't agree with how he wishes to solve it. I do not agree that the government should be the one investigating journalists, because this will give the government the power to influence journalists even more. It will give the government the power to go after journalists that they don't like, journalists that are genuinely exposing things. And I definitely don't think the police should have carte blanche to attack and investigate journalists, because oftentimes you don't even need the conviction. You just need the investigation, because you can make a journalist's life so hell that journalist will just stop covering certain stories unless they have a massive sort of hard-on for persevering. So I don't agree with that. But I do think that there needs to be a change in how one approaches the media. For one, I think media houses should be forced to reveal their allegiance prior to every single article. A journalist should say, I am a left-wing journalist. I despise the right wing at the start, at the top of every single article that they write. News24 should say in bold letters, News24 left-wing media, anti-right wing. They should expose their political biases right from the get-go. The reason I want that is step number 2. Media houses must be liable to lawsuits. Right now, in South Africa, it's slightly easier, but around the world, it is almost impossible to actually sue a news organization. You can take them to the press ombudsman, and the ombudsman will usually just force them to apologize, which if you've seen anything that's happened to Ronaldo Gous in News24, the apology is oftentimes hidden behind subscription services, or it's put right at the bottom of the page to make sure that no one actually sees it. And of course, at that time, the damage has already been done. You should have that front and center, declare your political bias, and then news organizations should be liable to lawsuits. And not just from people who are personally impacted, but if News24 wants to claim that they are a trusted news source and they don't sort of declare themselves as fully left-wing, if I, as a citizen, look at all of their stories, compare it, and find that in a single month, 9 out of 10 of their stories were severely left-wing biased, with almost no consideration to the right or the conservative movement, I should be able to sue them and say that they are misleading the public because they claim to be a neutral news organization, and yet all of their coverage consistently favors that of the left. This, I think, would be a far better option. Let the people have the power to take these organizations to court, and then let these organizations pay massive fines should they be found to be biased. There's nothing wrong with bias, and none of us are unbiased. My own coverage is never without bias. The way to think of bias is almost like a screen that lies at the front of all information that you take into your mind. As you read anything, as you're watching this video, all of the things that I say are parsed through this screen. If it passes your bias tests, you're going to go, right, I can listen to this. Now I'll take it on board and I'll think about it and I'll let it gestate. If it doesn't pass your bias test, you will immediately reject it as fake news, false misinformation, and therefore will not pay attention to it. So even news organizations will be, and it might be even that News24, if you genuinely ask them, do you guys think that you're a captured news organization? They'll tell you no, of course not. We try to be very, very neutral. We fact check the living hell out of every single one of our stories. But oftentimes that's the problem. You see, because if everyone in your organization is left-wing, what's going to happen is at every single turn when you look at the information, you're going to favor the information that confirms your biases. And that's the information that's going to make it in. So it's not that your story is false. It's just that your story heavily favors one side of the political aisle and completely ignores the other side that may actually be very relevant for people to actually make sense of what is going on. So I do think we need that. I think what Mkhwanazi is suggesting, I find myself agreeing with News24 here, this could very quickly lead to a police state, and I don't think any of us want that. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, hit the like if you liked. Just like if you didn't, let me know in the comment section down below how you feel. What do you think should happen to news media in South Africa? Where do we go from here? If you like what I do and you want to support me and allow me to do even more in the future, please consider becoming a member or a YouTube channel member. Massive shout out to those of you that already support. Hit the link in the description down below or the join button right below this video. As always, be good to each other, be kind to each other, and I will see all of you in the next one. Peace.